Okay, welcome. This is our very first episode of our new podcast, which is called Perspectives in Rural Education. This podcast will be featuring various guests who will be sharing their perspectives and experiences in rural education. And today we have a very special guest. We have the elementary principal at Martinsville, who is Victoria Norton. And so welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And so first, I just want to start for our listeners who don't know you, could you just introduce yourself and give us a brief introduction of who you are and kind of what your role is as the elementary principal?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question. When you ask what the role is, I think it changes daily. Certainly not in the same capacity that was when I was hired many years ago. But as you said, I'm Victoria Norton. I'm the principal in Martinsville, and we are a very small rural school district. We are a pre-K through 12 district. My building houses pre-K through sixth grade. And we're living in the middle of a pandemic, like all people in rural America and all across America, actually. And how we service our students during these times are quite difficult, but it's a challenge, and we get up and we try to face it every day as best we can. Awesome. I'm also an EIU alum, so I have to get that in there because go EIU.
Yes, we're going to get to that too. I have questions about that. So I know that you're a principal now, but I would love to hear all the way back at the beginning. How did you decide that you wanted to have a career in education, and what kind of drew you to the field?
Well, my mom told me at the age of 3 that she knew I was going to be a teacher one day. She said before I could read, because obviously I couldn't read at age 3, I would line up all of my dolls and bears in chairs in my room, and I would read books to them and teach them how to write. Now, keep in mind, I was 3 years old. I didn't know how to read or write back then either, very much. And so she said, you held a class when you were 3 years old. So I knew from a very young age that I would go into education. Absolutely love kids. I had a lot of teachers when I was in school that just helped shape me. It made me want to be a teacher. One, in fact, I have to give a shout out. She's also an EIU alum, Patty Richards. She's a retired teacher now from KZ Westfield, but I had her through my junior high and high school years, and she inspired me to want to go into education as well. And so I did get a degree from Eastern back in the 1980s. And I majored in theater arts, and I double minored in speech communication and English. I just love communicating. I love writing. I love reading. I love the theater. And so all those things were things that I enjoyed, and I wanted to be able to teach that. And right out of college, I got my first job at Paris High School, where I taught for just 1 year. It was I knew going in it would be a 1 year deal. Someone had gone back to get a master's degree, so I was her replacement for 1 year. And then after leaving Paris, I came to Martinsville and taught at the senior high school for several years before I became an administrator. My very first year as a principal was in 2001, which is when 9/11 happened. So it was kind of an interesting perspective to begin your administrator year when the United States saw a crisis. So, I started it at a very interesting time, very challenging time. And I think we kind of find ourselves in challenging times still.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, that's awesome. You just answered so many questions with that response. But one question I have is, I think for a lot of people, even outside of education, the transition from college coursework to the actual career itself is just an interesting transition. And so can you think back, what was that like, your first year of teaching? Was it a lot different? Just tell us a little bit about that.
Right. Well, of course, I was teaching prior to the age of computers, so that dates me quite a bit, as you can see. I had a typewriter, and I would type tests on a typewriter. I know that sounds really strange and odd, and some people may not even know what that is, but that's kind of when I started my career. And Patty Richards was still teaching at the time, one of my mentors. I think I called her. If I didn't call her every day, I called her at least every week and said, I think I made a big mistake. I'm terrible at this. And I cried almost every day because I just felt so overwhelmed. I was a young 21-year-old, and I had students that were 19. So I was just a couple years older than some of them. And I thought, man, I don't know what I'm doing. But, she held my hand through that and saw me through it. All of the things that I learned that year, I think I took to heart, and I found out I'm stronger than I thought I was, and I was able to survive that year. And that was actually back in a time period where we had no shortage of educators. In fact, it was not uncommon to have 200 applications for one position back then. And then when I started over here as principal, again, I had no trouble. I mean, you had dozens and dozens of applications for, just one job. And I think there's been a total shift. As we know, there's an educator crisis, a shortage of educators. So I've kind of lived in both eras, when we had a surplus of teachers and now where we absolutely have a shortage, especially in rural areas. So that's pretty eye-opening, to be able to say I've lived kind of through both of those times.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. So true. I was talking to a principal maybe a month ago over break, and he was telling me that when he graduated college, there were 2 PE teaching jobs in the entire state of Illinois. And now he's like, there's so many. And it's just crazy that over the shift of time, how things have changed. And so true. There's such a need.
Absolutely. And I can actually tell you a very similar story. I had a PE opening. It's probably been about 15 or 16 years ago now. And I had an opening for a physical education. And I stopped counting, I think, when I got to 200 in applications, I'll be honest with you. And so that shows you the shift there is now to where you'll be lucky to get 2 applications, because of the critical shortage that we have.
Definitely. What would your advice be to new teachers, and especially right now in the middle of the pandemic? Because I know that teacher retention rates are not the best. And so what would your advice be to a new teacher?
Well, first of all, you have to remember your why. Why do you want to go into it? Even if we are living in the middle of a pandemic, you cannot forget what that why is. If it's because you love kids, if it's because you feel like you have a drive and a passion to teach them a special content, or a subject matter that's very close to you, you just can't lose that. And even though we have these on our faces every day, you still have to deal with students and see their emotions and know what it is and do a check-in with them every day. It's so important to not lose that disengagement. Unfortunately, I think sometimes this does lend itself to disengagement. And I think we have to be very careful and very mindful of that. So just don't forget your why. Don't forget why you're doing it. And it is not for the faint of heart. I don't tell everybody to go into education. I tell people who have a passion and who love kids, that's who needs to go into education.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. That is so good. That'll be very helpful, I think, for people to hear, because it's so true. And you mentioned Patty. Is that what you said her name was? Do you keep her in the back of your mind as you've stepped into this like leadership role as a principal in leading others and your staff?
I think so. You may not be familiar with something in our local area, WTHI, which is a television station out of Terre Haute, Indiana. Each spring does something called the Golden Apple Winner. And they select, I think it's 5-10 individuals who are instructors throughout the Wabash Valley, because we're part of the Wabash Valley area where they have their news station. And I nominated her when I was still teaching for Golden Apple Award, and she won. And, I told the panel, and I, wrote letters. I said, she's the reason I'm a teacher. She's the reason I stuck with it. Now, she did not have an administrative degree, so she didn't have that to commiserate, I guess, with me or when I had to call her for something, but I still reach out to her. She's retired now and has been retired for many years, but I still reach out to her. I'll send her a card. I'll send her a thank you. If it hadn't been for her, I wouldn't be sitting here. Yeah. And then when I actually was at school at Eastern, I got my master's degree there. I got my specialist degree there. So, past my bachelor's, I was always returning to Eastern. And probably the biggest influence for me to step into this role was a professor by the name of Dr. Bev Finley. She's actually retired now from Eastern, but she was in the department. At that time, it was called Educational Leadership, I think was the name of the department. It's kind of shifted names just a little bit, but it was for people going into either the principal role or the superintendent's role. And so I'll be honest, I never saw myself leaving teaching. I thought I would teach forever. There's no way I'll leave my classroom, but I got that degree just so I could get further education, and it helps you move over on a salary schedule. As we know, teachers don't make a whole lot. And so you look for ways to do that. And so I never really saw myself, I guess, going for this position. And I'll be honest, I didn't even apply for the position I'm in. At the time, I was back in 2001, as I said, is when I accepted the job. I was on vacation. It was in August. I had a daughter that was getting ready to turn 2. And I got a phone call on my husband's cell phone, and it was the brand new superintendent in Martinsville. Her name was, at that time, her maiden name was Jill Bennett, but she's Jill Rogers, our superintendent, who's still the superintendent now. And she said, "Hey, I hear you've got the degree, or you're working on that principal degree. Do you want to be a principal?" And I went, "Well, I don't know. I don't think so." And so while on vacation, she said, "Well, why don't you think about it when you return from vacation? Let's talk." So my husband and I, that summer, we made a list of pros and cons, and what would attract me to that position, and what are the benefits of staying in my current teaching position. Did a lot of soul searching, a lot of prayers, and I felt that the good Lord was leading me into that position. So I went in and I said, "Well, here's what I thought of." And she said, "When can you start?" So I always kind of laugh. I'm like, I didn't even really apply for the position. I was more sought out for it. There have been times over the years I've told her, "Why did you do that to me?" In jest, obviously. But more times than not, I've thanked her for the opportunity that she gave me, for believing in me and giving me a chance. I mean, here I am 20 some years later and still going. So I have to thank her for that. But you were talking about, just people who influence or who kind of keep you in positions. I would say our current superintendent is the reason why I'm still here. An amazing leader. It's, rare to find a female superintendent in these rural areas. A lot of times it's dominated by males. And so she is actually one of the, I would say, strongest leaders in our area of superintendents around. She, first of all, has an amazing mind when it comes to business and laws, and just an all-around expert in so many areas. She's only a phone call away or a step away, or she'll pop in my office. So I have constant contact with her. And I think having that helped keep me where I am for this long. I've had friends, actually, principal friends, who've stepped away and said, I can't do this anymore. But I feel like they didn't have that connection to someone in their district, or they didn't have somebody at the university level who they were still in contact with. You've got to find those people. They hold you accountable. They lift you up when you just don't think you can survive another day in education. But those friendships they just help. They help guide you. They help mold you, and kind of help keep you where you are, so you can, I guess, flourish where you're planted.
Mm-hmm. That is awesome. What a cool story too of how you got into administration. Because that was a question I had for you. Was I feel like as a student in school, I remember kind of assuming that like the principal of my school had just always been a principal. Like that's what they went to school for. I never really knew what that process looked like. And so it's interesting to hear like what that was like, and even how you kind of got your requirements out of the way before you even knew you wanted to do that.
Right.
That's awesome. And so what was the transition like from being a teacher to the principal?
Well, I'll be honest. I think in the United States, there's probably a negative connotation around the term administrator or principal. People will look at that role as the bad guy, or you only see them if you're in trouble. I want to do away with that. I wish we could do away with that. But I know there's that connotation in people's minds. So I went from being a fairly popular teacher of either speech or drama or English, classes that kids either like to take or want to take, to being in a role where it doesn't matter who fills the role. They automatically don't like the principal. They're mean, they're tough, whatever that connotation is. So that was, I think, a rough connotation. So when I transitioned into that, I had to remember it's not me that they don't like. It's the role, it's the title. That's why I'd like to do away with those titles. All I'm here to do is make sure, number one, that kids are loved when they walk in the building. Secondly, I want them to learn. I know that sounds backwards, but like, oh, don't you want them to learn? Yes, I do. But a kid can't learn unless they're loved and feel welcomed in the school. So that I feel like is my primary responsibility. Make them feel loved, wanted, so glad that they're here. and we hope they learn something when they do arrive. So I think you kind of have to remember those things,
Mhm.
when you look at the kids. So that was a rough transition because, like I said, going from somebody, uh, from a teacher who people liked, maybe into a role that doesn't technically have I guess that, I don't know. Again, I just think it comes back from a mindset. I want to do away with that. I don't want people to think, oh, you just see me when you're in trouble. I want kids to see me every day, not in trouble, whatever it is. I want them to see me every day as a positive influence and not just somebody that you come and visit because something's happened.
Yeah, that's awesome. I heard a funny story a couple of weeks ago. Someone was telling me that they were, I think they were student teaching in the school, but they had a student in their classroom that had a behavior chart, and if they didn't, their punishment basically was to go to the vice principal's office if they didn't do well in their behavior chart. And they found out that the child was looking forward to going and talking to the vice principal. So he was like purposefully not meeting the requirements of his behavior chart so he could go hang out with the vice principal. And so they switched it, and they had that if he like got all stars that day, then he could go spend time with the vice principal. And I just think that like goes along with what you're saying so well, as to like there is this connotation of like, oh, the principal's office, like you're
Right.
in trouble if you're there, where it's like, no, actually, like they're there to support you and help you, and like it should
Absolutely.
be a good experience. It shouldn't be associated with this bad or negative experience.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. You briefly mentioned like an education specialist. Is that what it's called? Like the Ed S.
Mhm.
What is that, and like how does someone attain that?
Well, when I got that degree, that would have been, I think, in 2000. I ought to look, it's hanging on my wall somewhere. I think it was in 2004. It's been a long while since it's been hanging up there. I got what they call the educational specialist degree. And basically, that means if I ever choose to, I could become a superintendent in schools. But as I told you, I have a very close relationship with my superintendent. I watch what she has to do with money and grants and coordinating, salaries, benefit, all the numbers. I'll just be
Mhm.
honest with you. I did not go to school to be a math teacher. I went to school to be an English teacher, a drama teacher, and speech communication. So obviously, I know my strong suits, and I know my strong suit is not money and dollars and cents and numbers. Therefore, I don't ever foresee myself using that degree. Never say never, because I never thought I'd use the other one. But I've been in this long enough, and I think I'm getting close to the end of that retirement. So I don't see that coming. But that's what the EDS degree is.
Okay. Okay. Very cool. Um, what is special to you about being in rural education? Like, why have you stuck around a rural area? And um, yeah, like, what do you love about Martinsville?
Well, I grew up in Clark County, and my husband actually is from Martinsville. And he and his family for 150 years had a business here in town called Rao Foundry. And that was the biggest employer in the community. And so we were, I don't want to use the word stuck here, but we had roots here. We were from the area. He was from here. I was from Clark County. And so we knew we always wanted to stay close to home. We wanted to stay close to his job as well. Subsequently, the foundry was actually bought out. He still works there in management. But I want to say, first and foremost, it was the family who we had nearby, our parents nearby, our siblings nearby, nieces and nephews. And we just knew it was a place we wanted to continue. So we continue to make it our home to this day. We love rural America. There's, I think, something a lot of maybe urban areas don't understand: the work ethic that comes from small schools or small communities. I think how we rally around individuals or families or students anytime there's a crisis or a problem. It seems like our community just comes together and fill the need, fill the void that a family might have. So you don't get that in urban areas. The other thing that I love about rural schools is I know everybody's mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, siblings, because when you've been here that long, you just kind of know the family tree. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it is the case. And I love watching them grow. I do have students of students that makes me feel quite old. I always said when the grandkids start coming, that's probably my cue to get on out and retire. But it is great to be able to see that, because you see families, grow up together, and you see families flourish. And I don't know, rural America is great. It has its challenges. I won't lie. Rural America has its challenges, but I think far outweigh the wonderful things about it will far outweigh anything that's negative.
Yes, very well said. Very well said. I grew up in a rural area, and um, I think it's kind of special that the teachers know what their home lives are like, because you know how to meet their needs in a better way when you know their families and kind of what they're going through. And so I totally agree with that. What is your greatest advice pertaining to education?
Well, that's a tough one. Don't go into it if money is your goal, because you will never obtain that. Teachers are underpaid. Absolutely. First and foremost, I can tell you that. You work beyond the 8 to 3. I know, you may have colleagues, or you may even have relatives who say, "Oh, it must be nice to work 8 to 3 and have your summers off." I don't know any teacher that works 8 to 3 and really truly have summers off, because that is when they are planning. That's when they're grading. That's when they're doing professional development. That is when they're going back to further their degrees. So it is not an 8 to 3 job. And so if money is what you're looking for, keep moving down the road and find something else. You have to absolutely love kids, and you have to meet them where they are. And in rural settings, you're going to have top of the charts, kids straight A's, excelling at everything, to a kid who's going to come in your room and may have just survived getting there, getting themselves up that morning to get themselves to school. They may not have clean clothes. They may not even have a coat to wear to school. They probably have a hungry belly when they arrive. And you've got this, and you've got this, and you've got to meet them both where they're at. And you have to love them both, and you have to get them what they need. So this kid, you may be, "Hey, today we're going to advance you on these lessons, and here we're going." And the kid over here, we may be tying their shoes. We may get them clean socks. We may be washing their face. We may be, helping them get their tummies full. And that's meeting their needs too. So you have to meet them where they are, no matter what.
That's awesome. Such good advice. And then finally, my last question, what's your favorite student story? And so do you have any stories that are impactful or that you would like to share with the listeners?
That's really hard. I mean, when you're in education over 30 years, you literally have hundreds of stories. I'll think of one that's the most recent, though. We've had a young man, and I won't mention names, but he started out as an office aide here in our building when school began in August. And of course, I had him in school too when he was in elementary school, but he's a high school senior. And he just took a shine to kids when he was here. And I always kind of seen that about him when he was little, but now he's a big senior. He's been in a different building for a few years. And I just saw how he was interacting. And so one day I said, there are going to be days where we might not need you in the office. Would you want to go to a classroom and help in a classroom? And he thought, that sounds like a good idea. So I checked with one of the teachers, and I said, "Hey, could I send so-and-so down to your room, maybe to work with some students one-on-one? I think he'd be a great role model," that sort of thing. And sure. Well, throughout the course of the semester, he kept telling me he wanted to be a physical therapist. And I said, "You know what? We need physical therapists in school. I think you'd be great at that." "No, I think I want it." So we let several weeks go by, and more he's like, "I kind of like going to that classroom." I said, "I know, I can tell. So can the teacher." So in December, he decided to change majors. Of course, me, I'm an EIU alum, so I'm trying to get him to go to EIU. Sure enough, he applied to EIU, and he proudly told the high school staff, "I'm changing my major." "Oh, what are you going to change your major to?" "He's going to go into elementary education." Of course, I had to leave a minute because I was a little, I was so excited. So we have a young man who just started helping us as an aide from the high school, helping us a couple of hours a day. And now he wants to be a teacher, and he's going to be going to EIU. So I think that's probably one of my most recent favorite stories. Former student and student who will be looking to be a teacher someday. And I think that's fantastic. So I like that story. So I have to give shout out to the classroom teacher who took him in and under her wing and shape that and allowed him to work with students. And he's been a wonderful role model for our little ones, and our little ones just dote on him when he walks through the
Mhm.
door. They're just so excited and want to meet with him and do some little lessons with him. So I think that's kind of a heartwarming
Awesome.
story, but I literally have so many, but that's one from this year.
That's awesome. I love that you shared that because I've heard you talk about before how you really try to bring in the high school kids into
Yes.
the elementary school. And I think that is so important, especially for those elementary kids to have role models and people to
Yes.
look up to. And then for those high schoolers to be those role models. And so I think that's awesome. And I think it speaks to just um, the way that you present education to other people, like the fact that you're just seeing his potential and then helping him like kind of mentoring him in the process of like here's what I did and like here's how you can pursue this career. And I love that you shared that because I think it goes back to what you were saying at the beginning that someone did that for you and it's cool to hear that you're doing that for others too. And so
Absolutely.
I love that. And I just want to thank you so much for being willing to be a part of this. And it has been so encouraging to talk to you and to hear just your journey through education. And I think that the leadership and the mentorship you spoke about at the beginning that you received, it's so evident that you're giving that right back to others. And your passion and love for the kids is so evident. Like it just really shines through. And I think that is so important for our listeners to hear about if you're going to be in education, like you got to love kids.
You
And
do. You
so,
absolutely, first and foremost, you have to love them. And
yeah,
the harder they are to love, the more I love them.
yeah,
I mean, I know that sounds very strange, but it is so true. And so you have to keep that at the forefront always. On the
mhm,
toughest days, you have to remember that more than anything. But I had wonderful mentors. I still have great mentors. I have wonderful principals I can pick up the phone and call and say, man, help me through this situation. Just help me, talk me through it. And so I'm thankful for all of those relationships that have been built. So I just encourage any educator, no matter your age. I mean, no matter your age, what department you're in or what grade level you're in or what part of school or the role that you play in a school, just reach out. You are not an island onto your own and you're not in it alone. Just reach out because we're in it together to love kids.
That's awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much. I'll let you get back to your busy school life, I'm sure. And just thanks for being part of this episode
Nope.
one.
Yay, episode 1. All right, go EIU.